The USSR during the interwar period was a very strange place for combat aviation. For a country with barely any established economy and a paranoid Stalin in charge, it is somewhat miraculous to believe any domestic fighters were able to be produced. Yet create domestic fighters the USSR did, with one in particular breaking the mold of the Soviet stereotype and achieving the bleeding edge of innovation. The fighter in question is the Polikarpov I-16 Ishak, meaning donkey in English. It was developed alongside the I-15 by the Polikarpov Design Bureau, led by Polikarpov himself, to focus on one aspect not easily supported by the I-15 that all plane designers universally enjoyed: going fast. Drag is a ever-present factor that hinders aircraft developers from achieving their dreams of going fast, and biplanes, such as the I-15, were especially draggy due to having two wings. So, Polikarpov simply decided that in order to go fast, he would get rid of that second wing and build a modern monoplane fighter. To accomplish this, Polikarpov made the plane short and stubby, with broad wings, a fully enclosed canopy, and retractable landing gear operated by a crank handle much like the Grumman Wildcat. He also utilized a NACA cowling and chose a Wright Cyclone as the engine of choice, as it was being negotiated for licensed production during the I-16's development. Now, you may be asking, when was it first flown? Retractable landing gears, enclosed canopies, and a monoplane configurations are pretty advanced for interwar aircraft, probably meaning it's mid to late 1930s. Mayhaps 1935, like the Curtiss B-36 Hawk. The answer is the surprising year of 1933. By the blood, sweat, and tears of the Bureau, the I-16 Ishak achieved first flight on December 30th of 1933, making it a 1933 aircraft only by the skin of its teeth. As a comparison of other aircraft of the time, the Gloucester Gladiator, a biplane with an enclosed canopy and fixed landing gear, first flew on September 12th of 1934, and it is not till mid-1935, a good 2 years after the Ishak, that we see retractable landing gears, enclosed canopies, and monoplane configurations becoming standard with the likes of the early Bf-109s, the Hawker Hurricane, and the aforementioned Curtiss P-36 Hawk. With test flights beginning and its first flight complete, the I-16 began to explore what it could and could not do, with several beginning to raise doubts about its spin characteristics and general stability. From being so short and stubby, it was believed that it would be a pilot's nightmare that would try to kill them the first chance it got. So, in brave Soviet fashion, renowned test pilot Valery Chkalov climbed into the prototype Ishak, took it up, and forced it into spins to test its performance in this flight regime. What he found that day was not death, but a plane that could recover from spins with very little effort, needing the pilot to only place the stick in the neutral position to regain control. That, however, was its only redeeming quality in the ease of handling, as while the short and stubby approach to the design helped it to be incredibly light, in fact the lightest fighter to enter service when it was first introduced, it also made it incredibly sensitive to control input and dangerously unstable in flight for an unaware pilot, requiring them to always be holding onto the controls lest the plane try to kill them. Despite the difficulties of its handling, the Politburo and Stalin himself were quite impressed by the I-16 and would sanction its official introductions into service and production. The I-16 would achieve its intended goal of going fast, reaching 454 km per hour at its optimal altitude in its initial service version, the Type 5, which would begin introduction to service in 1935. Its first trial of combat, however, would only be in late 1936 over the skies of Spain, when the Spanish Civil War kicked off and Stalin deployed I-16s to assist the Republican Air Force. Though indeed a tough airplane to fly, when flown effectively it trounced on the Heinkel 51s and Arado 68s it first came up against, gaining the affectionate nickname Mosca, or Fly, by the Republicans, and the moniker Rata, meaning rat, by the Nationalists. Spanish experience with the I-16 would highlight a number of issues that Polikarpov would fix or try to fix in following upgrades, including more armament and the revisal of the armament's housing to reduce jams, better oil cooling for the engine to handle the hotter Spanish climate, increased strength of the wings to prevent them from flat-out snapping off in heavy G maneuvers, and a removal of the enclosed canopy. The canopy removal was due to a multitude of factors, namely it being hard to see through due to Soviet manufacturing quality of the glazing, and its tendency to slam shut during hard maneuvers, much to the grievance of many a pilot's heads. As the Civil War continued, I-16 soon found themselves both outdated and outnumbered by nationalist Bf-109s. By the time the war ended in mid-1939, 112 out of the 276 I-16s sent were lost in combat, with a further 62 written off in accidents. Another nation besides Russia to fly the I-16 would be China in their struggle against Japan during the Second Sino-Japanese War. They flew to moderate success, with several Chinese aces making their scores in I-16s. Russia would also fly I-16s against Japan during the border skirmish in the battles of Khalkhin Gol, where the first successful use of the RS-82 air-to-air rocket, a curious weapon if ever there was one, can be found in 1939. Fired against a Ki-27 at a distance of a kilometer and blowing the poor thing out of the sky. By 1939, studies into the I-16 found that upgrading it any further was impractical, or in some cases outright impossible, due to a now very unbalanced weight distribution problem caused by the intervening upgrades. No changes save redesigning the entire plane would remedy the issue, so further development of the I-16 was all but halted. Still, its incredible maneuverability, coupled with its relatively low cost due to being small and inexpensive to build, made many pilots stick with the plane even as Lag 3s began to enter service. Russia's own use of the I-16 would begin in 1939 against the Finns during the Winter War, where it would garner another nickname, the Flying Squirrel, by the Finns for its maneuverability. Finnish encounters with the I-16 were sparse, as Finland devoted most of its aerial efforts to intercepting Soviet bomber raids with what few fighters it had, only sometimes tangoing with the I-16s when they were escorting said bombers to their targets. The next time the I-16 flew in anger would be in 1941 with the commencement of Operation Barbarossa. I-16s that were able to get up into the air found themselves outmatched by the newer Bf-109s they faced. Though indeed the USSR had a moderate amount of deployed Lag 3s, I-16s, I-15s, and I-153 Chaikas were the vast majority of their operational air force by the time the invasion began, with Yak-1s in very limited numbers and still in delivery, while MiG-3s had no trained pilots. In addition, most Soviet aircraft that were deployed and ready to go when the invasion started were destroyed on the ground by the Luftwaffe before they even had a chance to get airborne. I-16s that survived the opening assault would lay into the German Luftwaffe with as much as they could give, some I-16s having been upgraded with 20mm cannons in the wings to give them a hefty punch. The cannon upgrades were, however, not standardized due to a lack of sufficient guns, so most I-16s were stuck with just the 4 low-caliber machine guns, which was barely enough to deal with the vast numbers of modern aircraft they now fought. Speaking of which, against the Bf-109Es, they could not match them in speed, but could dance on them in maneuverability that the Bf-109s could only dream to match, leading to Soviet tactics revolving around baiting in enemy fighters and pouncing on them before they realized their mistake and run away. By 1942, Lag 3s and Yak 1s were in sufficient numbers to begin replacing the much beleaguered I-16s, though some stayed in service till 1943 before they were fully retired from frontline duty and relegated to training pilots in twin-seater variants. They would serve that role until 1945, until the war ended, being fully retired then and mainly sent to the scrapyards. Spain would continue holding on to their Ishaks until 1953, though their use seemed to be minimal, if any. Owing to the 10,292 Ishaks made over its 9-year production, lasting from 1933 to 1942, a good number exist today, 3 still being airworthy amidst the USA, Spain, and Russia, and the rest as static displays of either original or replica origin, upholding Polikarpov's legacy as the man brilliant enough, or perhaps crazy enough, to make the world's first modern monoplane fighter as we would come to know in World War II.